first of the next block. Think tactically. Now, you might not be able to think tactically because you're a woman. If that's the case, just try thinking. And if you can't think because you're a blonde woman, have a man think for you. Right, has anyone not yet been insulted? I just want to make sure that you're all insulted. I don't want any of you claiming any sort of prejudice or anything like that. If you're feeling left out, just let me know. Come in closer. It's the sort of game we have. Do I know you? No. I'm sure I've seen you somewhere. Okay. Now, everything that we've seen so far has been designed and built purely to defend this picture. It's a very important picture. It is protecting the scaffolding, which is helping our restoration team restore what we call the Norman Keep or White Tower, rather stupidly built under the approach lanes to two airports. My employers now insist that I tell you that there were no airports in the 11th century. If I depart from the truth, I must make it clear. William, Duke of Normandy, also known as William the Bastard, defeated King Harold II at the Battle of Hastings on October the 14th, 1066. On Christmas Day that year, he was crowned William, the first of that name in England. His coronation took place at Westminster Hall. You should go and visit it while you're in London. You can stand on the spot where he was crowned. On that day, all the defeated Saxon warlords were in there. They were told to take their daughters with them to witness the coronation. But before the coronation, their daughters suffered a terrible fate. Some of these girls were as young as 8 years old. They were forced to marry the Norman warlords. They were made to marry Frenchmen. After this mass wedding ceremony, the coronation took place, and the coronation did not go without a hitch. It was a Saxon tradition when a new chief was named to let off a mighty cheer. But these were warlords. It wasn't hip hip hooray, it was a full-throated battle roar. Now, nobody told the Normans that that was going to happen. The Norman guard honestly thought the king had been murdered, and they charged in. Arms were hacked off, heads were split, and people were run through before they realised that the Saxons were just paying their respect. Not the prettiest coronation in our history, but by far the most entertaining. And it kind of set the tone for the next 12 years. William had to put down rebellion and insurrection just about everywhere until the year 1078. In 1078, his spin doctors began calling him the Conqueror, and he felt safe enough to begin work on this, his principal palace and fortress here in London. Work took 20 years to complete, and for nearly 500 years, kings and queens lived on the top floor. The floor below was accommodation for their most favoured knights and their ladies, and the lowest floor with windows, that's where the kitchens were. There is another floor. It's partly below ground. The walls there are 15 feet thick. There are no windows. It's dark. We're close to the river. It is always damp and cold. And this, come on now, this was the perfect place for the wine. I don't know how many times I've told you this was not built as a prison, it was built as a palace. Pay attention. I did rather lead you on that path though, didn't I? I'm trained in psychological warfare, you see. Took you right where you wanted to go and then just pull the rug from under your feet. Our first prisoner was a Frenchman. His name was Ranulph de Flambard, and he was the Bishop of Durham. Now, it would be madness to lock a French bishop, or indeed any bishop, in a wine cellar. So he was imprisoned in the top of that turret. The year was 1100, but by 1101 he'd noticed a few things. The warders liked to drink, so he threw them a party, and he had wine brought up from the cellar in casks, which he'd noticed were bound round with rope. And the warders did what they do best. Ate far too much, drank far too much, and fell asleep. Ranulph de Flambard saw his moment and seized it. He removed the rope from these casks, and this ancient French bishop abseiled 90 odd feet on an improvised line and got away. Our first prisoner escaped. Did we learn from this? No. In the Tower's long history, we had 3,500 prisoners, and of these, 81 have escaped. An escape ratio of?
I just swim, I don't do maths.
Right, okay. Yeah, an escape ratio of 1 in 42. Statistically, the Tower of London is one of the least secure prisons anywhere in the world. We're rubbish. You are quite right. However, it was not until the turn of the 16th century that the wine rack was put to one side and another rack was installed. Just one moment. Excuse me, sir.
Be quiet! This is a palace, not a playground!
I'm not joking. I can't hear myself speak. I don't know how you can hear it over that racket. Right. What was I talking about?
The rack.
The rack, yeah. The rack. Another rack was installed. This rack had a sinister purpose: torture. And torture is misunderstood. Many people think of torture as a punishment. It isn't. It just feels that way. Torture is a way to keep a conversation going. It is a tool of interrogation. And by far the most famous interrogation that took place here was that of Guy Fawkes. Guy Fawkes is famous in English history for being the only man to have entered Parliament with honest, noble intentions, a clear agenda, and the resources to see it through. Something that you won't find in our government anytime soon. He was going to blow the place up, but he got caught. James I would have been killed in the blast, and he was desperate to learn who was in Guy's gang. Guy was saying nothing. The interrogators asked if they could use torture, and a torture warrant was signed. Only 48 torture warrants have been issued and actioned in the Tower since the year 1215. Does anyone know why that year is significant? It was the signing of the Magna Carta, which outlawed the use of torture in England, unless royal consent had been given and it was in the national interest. Wow. James I was quite an interested party. Guy Fawkes had tried to kill him. He was desperate to learn who was in Guy's gang. So, Guy Fawkes was bound by his wrist and ankles to 2 spindles. These spindles were set in the rack. By means of a ratchet mechanism in the middle, the spindles turned in opposite directions, so he began to stretch. Now, an osteopath would charge you a fortune for this, but on our rack you could stretch a man nearly 4 inches. At the 3-inch point, any therapeutic value is lost. Joints get pulled apart. Now, your joints are held together with ligament and tendon, and these are stronger than bone. When your joints get pulled apart, it is, in fact, your bones that break. But not cleanly. They come away in a flake fracture. Covers a lot of surface area and nerve endings. Pain! Lots of pain! That's what we're talking about here. They all cracked on the rack. Are you all right? Just looked a bit giddy there for a minute. Now then, some say Guy Fawkes didn't crack, but he did sign a confession, and that was as good as a death warrant. He was taken from here to Westminster Palace Yard, and there, a commoner guilty of treason, like Sir William Wallace, he was hanged, drawn, and quartered. Unlike Wallace, he didn't suffer. So brutal had been his racking that as he made his way up the gallows steps, he collapsed and died. But they carried on anyway. This remains a place of torture. It's a gift shop now. Although my employers insist I tell you that shopping in our gift shop is a happy and pleasant experience. I'm sure they're right. Especially if you like spending your hard-earned money on cheap tack at extortionate prices. I hope you're going to put that one on YouTube. Right. Yeah, anyway, you go in the White Tower today, you'll note that it is a marvel, a wonder of medieval defensive architecture. And you might be forgiven for thinking that in medieval times people were small, because you have to bend your head to go through the doorways. If you bend your head to go through a doorway, just take a glimpse to your right. You will notice that there's an empty space. If you were attacking the fortress, that space wouldn't be empty. it would be occupied by a man with a mace or club. And as you bent your head to come in, your head would get the good news. In such a space, a man could hold off a battalion. It's great, isn't it? As you go up the stairways, you'll notice that they usually spiral in one direction, with one notable exception, which is Flamstead Stairs. But they spiral in one direction, so that if you're coming up, you have to fight left-handed, which isn't good for most people. However, if you're defending, you're clear to fight right-handed. And if you are running up the stairs, and please do, you will fall over. Every now and again there is a step which is asynchronous. It's a couple of inches taller than all the steps preceding it. This step will trip you up. It is known by the unimaginative name trip stair. The most notable of these is actually in the Bloody Tower, so really give it some of those staircases. Okay. Now then, when you go in the White Tower today, you'll see the armour of the kings. Shield, lance, sword, bayonet, rifle, pistols, muskets, cannons, mortars, big boys' toys. But in there, gentlemen, you're going to feel woefully, woefully inadequate at a very personal level. Check out Henry VIII's armour. You'll know what I mean when you see it. But I consider it a duty to warn you that those codpiece are an early foray into psychological warfare. As you're all civilians, you probably don't understand psychological warfare, so I'm now going to give you a lesson. Bet you thought I was bald, didn't you? Do you all see my head?
Yes.
Do you all see my head?
Yes.
Do you see my hat?
Yes.
Psychological. My head doesn't go to the top, but it is your natural assumption that it does. This makes me look taller and more fierce. I want you to look at the codpiece, think of the hat. This is going to be very important for you two fellas. On now to Tower Green and the heart of darkness in English history. Come on now, let's go. Yeah.